So thank everyone for coming. My name's Eric Dyer. I'm the program director for AIA Monterey Bay, and welcome to AIA Monterey Bay's 5th installment in their housing series. Last spring we brought you talks giving an overview of the housing problem in California and the nation, the causes and possible solutions. We had 2 talks from 2 of the leading architectural firms designing housing in California and the US, David Baker Architects and the AIA gold medalists Larry Scarpa and Angie Brooks for Brooks Scarpa, and finished with a really lively, wonderful discussion of a community forum on housing in our area. And all these talks, including this one, within a few days will be up on the AIA Monterey Bay's YouTube channel. So if you missed any of those, I'd really encourage everyone to go online and take a look. I also want to encourage everyone to watch for some exciting new programs coming up. On March 20th, we are partnering with the Carmel Public Library Foundation on a talk on Kip Stewart, A Life in Painting, Design, and Architecture. And it'll be presented at the Carmel Women's Club again Wednesday, March 20th, starting at 7 o'clock. And the presenters will be 3 presenters, actually, which is Marianne Shiggentance on the architecture, the great painter David Laguerre on the painting, and the founder of DWR Furniture, Rob Forbes, on his furniture design. So please come to that. And then we're also partnering, coming up on May 11th, it's a Saturday, and there'll be a garden party as part of it, but we're partnering with the Monterey Museum of Art, and it will be a talk on the late architect Mickey Munig, designer Post Ranch, and many other great buildings in Big Sur. So that'll be a great one to attend. So we look out for all our announcements about those things. For tonight, I want to thank Sandbox and Michelle Jokic and her husband Mark Talbot for, again, allowing us to use this great space designed by Jerry Lomax, one of our great members here who actually pretty much founded the Arts and Architecture lecture series for our chapter. And I'd also like to thank Charmaine Jones. Charmaine is around, our executive director, and all of our AIA Monterey Bay Board of Directors. And especially like to thank our sponsor, the Pine Inn and the Tally Ho Inn in Carmel, who's providing the housing for Charles tonight. So tonight we're talking about co-housing, and we have the leading exponent of pretty much in the world of co-housing. Charles Durrett is an architect, author, and advocate of affordable, socially responsible, sustainable design. He has made major contributions to community-based architecture and co-housing. Charles designed over 50 co-housing communities in North America and has consulted on many more around the world. He also designed an equal number of affordable housing projects. He is the principal architect at the Co-Housing Company based in Nevada City, California, and his work has been featured in many national magazines and publications, Time Magazine, New York Times, LA Times, Boston Globe, Washington Post, Architectural Record, and many more. Charles has received numerous awards as well, which include the World Habitat Award presented by the United Nations, a Silver Achievement Award for Active Adult Community by the National Association of Home Builders, and many more. He continues to devote his time to new housing, co-housing groups, and affordable housing development startups. His recent book, Co-Housing Communities, Designing for High-Functioning Neighborhoods, delivers a complete start-to-finish guide for designing anything where the emphasis lies with the community. His other books include Creating Co-Housing, Building Sustainable Communities, Senior Co-Housing Handbook, a community approach to independent living, as well as a dozen other books on housing. He lives in a 34-unit community in Nevada City, co-housing in Northern California, which he designed. And he previously lived in Doyle Street co-housing in Emeryville, California, where his family lived for 12 years. I guess this must be true, the Oxford English Dictionary credits him with actually coining the word co-housing. So you can't get better than that on this topic. So Charles Durrett, thank you.
Okay, so housing, yeah, it is an issue these days of consequence. And I got to tell you, I used to work for regular developers designing affordable housing. And that's one thing, but I really grew very tired of the complications, the bureaucratic hurdles, the difficulties, the political difficulties of getting those housing projects built. It was just too hard. And it's not right that it should be that hard. So what I found in the context of co-housing when I was going to the University of Copenhagen was that this was very citizen-led housing. And it's night and day in terms of what the public will do to make those projects happen. 55 co-housing that I've designed now, like this one here, and only one of them didn't get approved, and that was in Marin County, and we figured that out within a few weeks, so we didn't pursue it. But it's something shifts when the second grade teacher of the mayor is there making a case for her housing and the housing she needs, when 2 or 3 nursing moms are up at the podium saying, I need this housing right away. It shifts the whole argument. When somebody's favorite librarian is there saying, I need this housing. And I think we all know that the people that need housing today is not just homeless people, which is consequential. I wrote a book about homelessness recently, and it started quite a number of housing projects around the US, including a 70-unit homeless project that I just finished in Napa County. Again, even in homelessness, I did a 5-story homeless project in downtown San Francisco, and it was not downtown, it was right at the foot of Pacific Heights. And in fact, it's right there on Baker Street, right at the foot of the Pacific Heights. And the very first public hearing, it's 5 stories, and the very first public hearing, 26 people got up to the podium and said, over my dead body. With their nice silk scarves, et cetera, et cetera. They were concerned about their neighborhood. That makes some sense. But the very next day, I went out and I designed that project with 10 people who were homeless, and went out and got 9 camel hair coats at the different thrift stores, and 1 summer dress at a thrift store, and we went door to door in Pacific Heights. Over a couple of weekends, and the very next public hearing, we had 6 people at the podium. And Sue, I forget the head of the Planning Commission in San Francisco, but she's quite a mover and shaker, but she said, I could live with 6. I couldn't live with 26. And of course, that is too many reminders that I've had, I don't know about you guys, but land use in California and most of the US is very much a mobocracy. It's who shows up, who doesn't show up, and by default, if you don't show up too often in California, it's over a third of the projects don't get approved because of, NIMBYs, basically. And we've got to figure out a better way. Well, it also turns out that in the context of working with, in this case, these 2 moms and that mom, 3 moms, these neighborhoods are quite different than any neighborhood that you could ever design on spec. And I've designed 55 now, and people always, I'm just about ready to start another one, and people always say to me, Chuck, you've designed all these great neighborhoods, Neighborhood of the Year in Northern California, for example, in 2004. I mean, first of all, no developer could ever make a neighborhood like that. Even a nonprofit developer can't quite make a neighborhood like that. And where people know each other, care about each other, and support each other through life, basically. My kid's having a earache, what do I do? My grandmother needs a ride to the pharmacy, can you help me? Blah, 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 it just goes on in a high-functioning neighborhood in a way that it just doesn't in most American neighborhoods today. So it's not only plays a big role in getting it passed politically, it plays a big role of the quality of life later, and it actually plays a big role in the financing, believe it or not, because these moms, all 3 of those moms kicked in 20% of their house value in the design phase to get this project built. So it front loads all of that investment, which means I'm answering to them as opposed to Daddy Warbucks with his white belt and his white shoes, who thinks he has the best, or she has the best idea of what a community is. And I'd rather not answer to them, if I don't believe that they have the best interests of the future residents in mind, and if I don't think they're going to make a functional neighborhood. So over and over again, and I was going to mention that people say, Chuck, you've designed 55 now, why don't you just design the next one? And I argue that I don't want to do it for lots of reasons. The design process is the number one way to build the community. I mean, everybody's got a little architect in them, and it comes out in this process, no doubt about it. I think you'll see it in these slides. And it's always better when I involve them. It's always a better neighborhood. It's a better neighborhood than I could have accomplished on my own, for lots of reasons. One of the things that made me really good at this was I spent 13 months, after spending a year in Denmark only studying housing, then I went back for 13 months only to study co-housing. But I worked with 7 Danish anthropologists in the course of that study, and 1 American anthropologist. So the American was writing a book about why the Danes had assimilated into the US better than any other immigrant group. And the other 7 spent a lot of time saying that we never do 2 projects the same, and they're actually very involved as consultants in these projects in Denmark, because we're looking very closely at who this culture is, who this culture wants to be, and how to get there. The process is different for every culture too. And that really shaped my whole approach to housing, basically, because I've done 2 projects right across the street from each other, and they are different subcultures. Every time I did a project in Oklahoma last year, everybody was Republican. That doesn't happen very often, and it took me a long time to learn how to work with those guys, but my motivation was to learn to work with them in a way that would make a great neighborhood. And by the way, they said it shifted their politics, frankly. That's a whole other story, which I'm really happy about. So it's better. Let me continue, since I have way too many slides. I shouldn't spend all night on one. Whoops. Uh-oh. This happens to be Emeryville Co-Housing on Doyle Street in downtown Emeryville. Interesting thing about that photo is not one person in that slide was born in the USA. And it was a very active, very clear group, and you can see why I had to be very focused on who they were collectively as an aggregate culture, really, a variety of cultures. And yet, they knew the value of community. They had all grown up in small villages or small towns in Mexico, South Korea, Jamaica, the Netherlands, China, all over. And they had all come from small villages, so they knew the advantages as individuals, to what extent a community really sets the individual up for success. Does anybody here know what the shortest poem in the English language is? Anybody? Me, we. And every reading of that poem always comes down to the same thing. I can never reach my potential unless we reach our potential. And I felt like that concept was very inherent with this group of people and made for a very successful co-housing. Crazy political process. You would think it wouldn't be in Emeryville, but we were asking for twice the density, half the parking, over the height limit, and instead of 15-foot setbacks, 0-foot setbacks. And we got all 4 of them. And that only happens when you have real people up at the podium. That's my experience, over and over again. You can ask for the moon when you have real people up at the podium who plan to live there, and that's a game changer, and say things sometimes quite absurd, like here it is May, and somebody will get up to the podium and say, well, I'd really like to get my kid into the school district this September. It's okay if they say that, because we haven't even gotten it approved yet, because everybody gets the feeling that this is somewhat urgent to real people. as opposed to something that I read in the paper that I know I should be paying attention to. But it all shifts. As much as I read the paper and care about the big picture, as soon as I get a real group of folks at the table, then they become my priority. And real people make you focus in a way that even the New York Times can't make you focus. San Francisco Chronicle can't make you focus. All the photos in the world can't make you focus like this person sitting in front of me who says, you know, and too often, I don't have any money, but let's figure this out. Okay, and we'll talk about the money part later. This happens to be a project I did in downtown Tokyo. And talk about a different culture. I mean, the training that I had to undertake to learn how to work with that culture was quite extensive, because it is a very different culture. But once they figured out how to work together, and that was the hardest part. I mean, this group was half 20-year-olds and half 80-year-olds. It was the strangest thing. And in Japan, 20-year-olds and 80-year-olds don't normally talk. And in the creation of a co-housing community requires dialogue, real dialogue. So the first thing I had to do was ask the 20-year-old to match up with an 80-year-old, 20-year-old, 80-year-old. This is a 2-day exercise, you know, with all group process stuff. And I want you guys to talk about something really difficult that you would never agree on, really complicated, like, you know, politics or even like abortion, you know, really complicated things. And until you can start to see the other person's point of view. And so you can see, and then you can cut it off, but you can, as soon as you get there, then you'll meet with another person. And became a very successful project. You could see that that project probably wouldn't have been built unless I took that 2-hour exercise and did that thing. I could see that. I had to get these good folks very comfortable with speaking with each other, and I always go back to the anthropologists who taught me how to listen to people in their real settings, not just you know, an academic approach. Let's see, what should I point this to? Over there? Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of ownership that happens in the course of the design process. That's another reason I'm so wedded to it. You know, not only do they have to find money, they have to find the will to speak truth to power, which is over and over city councils, planning commissions, board of supervisors, et cetera, et cetera. And the ownership comes from them placing those blocks on that table. You know, after 2 full days of creating criteria, only talking about criteria, programming at its most thorough, at its most extraordinary, in-depth level, like big things like, you know, how many cars are we going to do and we're going to have, and over and over and over again, they want half, or after a couple days of conversation, they want half or less than half of what the zoning code requires. So I need them up at the podium saying, no, we talked about this, we're going to share cars, we're going to carpool, we have every desire ourselves. Of course, we want enough parking, but we have enough parking. We don't need to asphalt over your fair, beautiful city to make it possible to not park on the street, etc. So that dialogue gets very rich, extremely rich, to the point that they know how to make the argument to the city councilors and the planning commissions, and they generally know things that and have thought through things better than the planning commission and the city council has. I feel like I can go into depth about this with architects. You know, in June at the National AIA, I gave a talk there, and it's the first. I don't really talk to architects very often. Usually, I am talking to, you know, groups of families. Like this happens to be Nevada City, California, and the population of that whole town is only 3,000 people. And so I did a public presentation in town, and to my surprise, 150 people showed up. And they were all ready to make a good neighborhood, largely because they were having housing shortages, no doubt, like everybody else, and they were having a chronic loneliness in that region because people lived on 20 acres, 100 acres, and lived in settings that were designed to consume and to overconsume and set individuals up to watch TV mostly. You know, that would become their highest and best use, and that's nowhere. And culturally, they were starting to see that. And the first thing I did is when I went to Nevada City to see how viable I thought that project was, first thing I did is I went to the local library, and I found that they had three copies of this book here that were checked out all the time. I mean, literally continuously checked out. So I thought, okay, this is a very good chance. And I bring that up because I just had this crazy experience this week where a young journalist said, Chuck, why did it do so well in the early years? There's about 200 now built in the US, and it really tapered off in about 2005 or so, started to taper off. And her theory was that because in the early days, there was only one book in the country to look at, it was this book, and to figure out how to do it. And it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it would just help people to get through the process. And now everybody goes to the internet. Book sales are way down, but now everybody goes to the internet, and they get this sporadic level of information that really doesn't say, here's how you start, here's how you launch, here's how you sail, here's how you land, kind of approach to it. So anyway, she just came up with that this week, and I got to figure out how to, just tell that story. Whoops, sorry you guys. I hit it twice. Now what do I do? Okay, this happens to be the group in Oklahoma, and we spent 2 full days coming up with a program, exactly what we're gonna do, everything. I come up with 3 little books for the group, about 150 pages total, before I draw a single line. This is the program. And it's all stuff that they've come up with. Then I separate the groups into 2 separate rooms, no spouses together, 2 separate venues. And I say, now both of you guys come up with a site plan based on the criteria, and then we critique them based on the criteria until one evolves, which happened to be that one, and they built it. And I think you could see the major byproduct here, which is, many of them not even looking at the camera. They're looking at, with all the pride that they brought to making that thing happen. And that's the real product of consequence. They built it just like that model right there, more or less exactly the same. But that's part of the picture, but that's the smile on their faces is the consequential picture of consequence. This is the project that we got the Human Habitat Award from the UN. 2 co-housing next to each other, and they kept all this open space for their collective farm, which, by the way, they farmed for 1 year, and then they hired 2 farmers to farm it. Farming is in the air, no doubt, but a lot of people come to the table with some aspirations that they can't fulfill, and they find out it's just cheaper to buy the lettuce than to grow the lettuce. But it's been a very positive project. And when the woman called me from London to say, hey, Chuck, you won the Human Habitat Award this year, I said, what? You guys never give it to Americans, as far as I could tell. I mean, it's always somebody from the Philippines or South Africa or something. And I didn't believe her. I thought it was a prank. And she says, no, this year we decided that the Americans are the locust on the planet, and you guys are trying to do something about it. I thought, okay. And we're doing it by getting people involved. And in 55 projects, nobody has ever asked me for anything like this. Nothing like that. In fact, when I think about driving down this road, I think every 12th house is some forlorn senior watching TV, some forlorn 10-year-old playing Nintendo on their computer, and it's the epitome of divide and conquer from a political point of view, and keep people from organizing and doing anything intelligent as a society, or even building a viable society. So, garage doors just don't do it. I don't care how fancy it is. Did you tell me where to point this to? I'm assuming it's back there. This is kind of the epitome of a logical co-housing setup, where this happens to be Fair Oaks, California, just finished not long ago, where all the parking, and this is all residents doing, all the parking goes in one place, and the houses are along a common lane here, that where people and front porches relate to each other, consequentially, over time. I might have to ask somebody just to forward it. Is that easier for you guys? Okay, this is the one done in Fresno, if you ever happen to be in Fresno. It's a very successful co-housing. Parking off to one side and then the lane here. You know, the interesting thing about this project, there was a lot of people at the very end of the project who couldn't afford to move in, and the group figured out how to make that happen. The first one done in Davis, California, 23 out of 26 were first-time home buyers, which was a big plus. And the group got very, very serious when they got to thinking about what co-housing would bring to their lives. They got very, very serious about making it successful, and hired a mortgage broker that really counseled everybody about how to buy a house. 10 of them were graduate students at UC Davis, so this was a leap. This was a big stretch. But they had such an amazing mortgage broker, which we have to do project after project, that just counsels people how to buy a house. Some people don't get there because they're not that motivated. They're not going to buy into that single-family house neighborhood, for example. But when they start to see a community that they feel compels them to walk their talk, live their values, and other things, then they look at it quite differently. Go? Thank you. You know, one of our inspirations is looking at ancient Chinese villages where, you know, the village is married to the topography, is married to the farm, and there's always a serious symbiosis in the creation of those villages, very much like co-housing. But what's amazing to me is when there's any real estate at all, which is like 2+ acres, then you know, they tend to feel like a village. They tend to look like a village and feel like a village from a behavior point of view. I'll just do this. Can you guys move it? Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is the one I live in Nevada City, California. It's so interesting to me. This woman here, whoops, oh, back, oh, now it's working. Whoops. This woman here, Leal, she told me many times as we were planning this project, oh, Chuck, by the way, you know, I really care about privacy. And because she had built her own house before, and we had people moving from 100 acres and a lot of people moving from 20 acres, very rural part of California. But after we had done this 2-day workshop on the values of the group and the goals of the group and the activities and the places that we were going to create in the context of criteria program, we did an exercise where we separated people 120 feet from each other, face to face, no spouses across from each other. And then I go through this scenario where I say, imagine on Sunday night you had a common dinner, and common dinner is very typical in co-housing. I should mention the tip for anybody who doesn't know here, that the main 6 characteristics of co-housing is 1, it's developed and planned with the future residents. 2 is that there's extensive common facilities. 3, the design of the whole site plan facilitates community. 4, there's no hierarchy in the decision making. 5, there's no common budget. And 6, I forget what it is right now, but it's in that book somewhere. Anyway, I mentioned that in the context of making that site plan, I'll think of it. In the context of making that site plan, I mentioned that, imagine you had dinner the night before with a resident who sat across the table from you. And she was describing how that evening, later that evening, she was going to have a very complicated conversation with a grown child. And she was really worried about it. And now imagine it's that's Sunday night. Now imagine it's 8:30 on Monday morning, and you're both leaving your house at the very same time. And you don't want to pry necessarily, but you do want a sense of her mood. And if she's very dour, you might ask her for tea later that day or tomorrow or sometime, and plan to connect with her. You just want to see what mood she's in. And now I want you to walk towards each other until one of you stop, and there's like 20 people here and 20 people there, maybe 30. When one of you stops, both of you stop. So they walk towards each other. And the distance here, I use 120 feet because in the heyday of American neighborhood making in the 1920s, that was the distance that most front doors were from each other. If you go to an old town in, like, I just finished a project in Eugene, Oregon, they're exactly 110 feet from front door to front door, or 120 feet from front door to front door. So, so I said, now walk towards each other until one of you stop and then both of you stop. And that distance ended up being 26 to 40 feet. So these front doors are exactly 26, doorknob to doorknob are 26 to 40 feet. So that's the kind of mechanisms I use to get these things designed. And I mentioned to the group, okay, here's the deal. We're designing these neighborhoods, as you can see from that exercise, as if you care about each other long term. And that's stitching a viable society back together, I would argue. Now, it's so funny because she's like, everybody has a front porch and a back porch, and in co-housing, 80% of the time people are on their front porch, and 20% they're on their back porch. In typical neighborhoods, it's 80% on their back porch and 20% in their front porch. Something happens when you know each other. You don't care if they come by. In fact, it's an amenity that somebody would come by and say hello, just old-fashioned front porch to front porch kind of behavior. And she sits there, I don't think I've ever seen her on her back porch, but she infinitely stressed how important privacy was to her before she moved in. That's one of the things I find most interesting about co-housing is over and over again, we have been so propagandized about pick yourself up from the bootstraps and individualism that we don't even know ourselves anymore. We don't know what it's like about being in a culture, in a community, in a village, to the point that we have talked ourselves into this is who we are, and I guess I can't change it. So interesting to me because, theoretically in the general population, 60% of the population is extroverts and 40% are introverts. And I guess that's true. But, over and over again, as people get involved with co-housing, somebody will say, Chuck, I'm just such an introvert. I don't know if I can do this, blah, blah, blah. Over and over again, a couple will get involved, and you can never tell who said they were the introvert before and who actually turned out to be the extrovert later. Again, in my view, it comes back down to, do I know about them? Do I care about them? Do I support them at some basic level? That's not something that's foisted on them. That's just something that organically grows. I think it's easy to organically grow when you set them up for success, when it resonates with them at a basic level, and in the end of the day, it actually serves the individual, makes their life more convenient, more practical, more economical, more fun, more interesting, more safe. End of the day, as much as I believe in that poem, Me, We, I also feel at some basic level Ayn Rand was correct. We only do things for ourselves. But when you do things for yourself, it turns out that it's easier to do something for myself if I'm doing something with you and for you at the same time. So I think that's, it turns out to pay dividends. I consider co-housing as kind of instant karma, basically. Next. One of our priorities one of our goals, it's so funny because people think this takes a lot of time. These projects take less time than any other project I've ever worked on, multifamily or otherwise, because there's an urgency that everybody gets caught up in. Oh, I want to get this thing done. Let's get this thing done. Let's make it happen. I love working with senior co-housing. They're the best because they love to say things like, I don't even buy green bananas anymore. Chuck, get this thing done. So every time somebody gets bogged down saying something for the second or third time, somebody will just go, green bananas, and everybody knows, move on. And then they just go, bananas, everybody knows, move on. Anyway, the goals for this community took 20 minutes. And I kind of feel like people are burgeoning with a whole nother set of values that they want to put on the table for a functioning neighborhood, really. That's why it only takes 20 minutes. We get about 50 criteria. One of their criteria was, I'll never forget, make a spontaneous landscape, make a spontaneous environment. so that I don't have to plan my life anymore. I don't have to call somebody and say, I want to have coffee 2 weeks from now, and then 2 weeks arrives and you don't feel like doing it anymore. You know, that whole very self-conscious very self-conscious behavior versus very subconscious behavior. I just feel like having coffee. You want to go have coffee? And this slide illustrates as well as any. These three women were going to the movie on a Sunday evening, and Victoria is texting her husband saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to go to the movie. They were on their way walking out, and she just ran into him and said, we're going to the movie. And she just said, I'm going to the movie. So that is about as spontaneous as you can get. I don't know why I keep switching these back and forth. You know, Meg here, she moved into co-housing at 89. She just died not long ago, 3 weeks before her 100th birthday. But weeks after she moved in, she decided that she didn't want to live next to the parking anymore. Her kids had talked her into moving next to the parking. She decided she wanted to live at the furthest house from the parking, about 700 feet. And, you know, even though she mostly was in her walker, but sometimes she was in her wheelchair. And I said, one day I was just a little bit astounded myself, and I said, Meg, why did you choose to move so far away? And she says, I decided that my relationship with my neighbor is more important than my relationship with my car. It's amazing how many epiphanies that people have either before they've planned the project or after they've planned the project in terms of what becomes a value of consequence. We moved in with 21 seniors and 37 kids, so it's very, very intergenerational. And it was young parents were very active in the creation of this co-housing community, mostly because they wanted to be good parents. They wanted to learn how to be good parents. And I would argue, you know, that whole going to the movie thing, that's one thing, sure, that's great. But really, it's so much bigger than that because, you know, we have like 15 great moms and 15 moms who are learning to be great moms. And we have 15 great dads and 15 dads that are learning to be great dads. And everybody comes to that recognition that, you know, I actually have some stuff to learn. I want to be good at this. And they set out to make that part of the picture, but not intentionally. It's really interesting. Seniors do a lot more with intention, but the young families just sort of gravitate towards that. What do you do in a earache? What do you do when this happens and that happens? And all of a sudden you just find yourself helping each other all the time. This is my house, and you know, energy efficiency is always, you know, it's so interesting. Everything is just so interesting. It only takes a couple people in the group to help others see other possibilities. I really love that about this whole experience. You know, we were planning our budget at the very end, and one mom said, before we started construction, this young mom, she says, I don't know how many of you guys have walked through a clear-cut forest lately, but what it does to the air quality, what it does to the habitat, what it does to the watershed, it's just something we shouldn't contribute to. We're going to be making new houses, etc. So we ended up spending $3,000 more per house to have 100% FSC grown lumber, sustainably grown lumber. And there was no guilt tripping, and there was no righteousness about it. There's no holier than thou. I really love that way of getting this job accomplished. She made it sound like it's just a smarter, more thoughtful way to go. Even though she was one of the people in the group who had the least amount of money, she just brought it up. She lives there now. She's lived there from the beginning, like 18 years now. And so we did that, and then I have learned over the years to do windows with no headers because most of the natural light comes in at the very top of the window. And so we, you know, my highest energy bill in 20 years is minus $50 with 1 kilowatt of energy because the houses were designed like that. And it's so funny how it's challenged me as an architect, you know, and it has to deal with everybody's prejudices. People come to the table with all these weird prejudices. Like, if I live in houses that are attached to each other, I'm not going to have good natural light. well, it's better natural light than any of them had previously in their single-family house. I'm so nauseated by how many times I walk into a single-family house and the lights are all on because they didn't get very conscious about how to make the natural light work. In this multifamily, because it percolates to the top as an issue, then it gets really thought through in ways that it doesn't normally get thought through. And by the way, it's cheaper not to do a header. Whoops, that's my favorite slide, which is my energy bill. We have some 2x6 studs and some 2x8 studs, and we have doubled 5/8 gyp. I'm so glad I can talk to you guys about this. Because it's harder with lay people, to describe that. And we have 0 air conditioners in Nevada County, where nobody builds a house without air conditioning, believe me. It's well over 100 degrees often, and we have no AC because we don't need them. We have a diurnal, which helps. In other words, it's cool at night. So, but we have all this extra gypboard that sucks in the diurnal, sucks in the cold air at night. And I'm only bringing that up, first of all, I thought you might be interested, but second of all, because when you get people at the table who go, Chuck, what? No air conditioning? Is that crazy? Can we do that? I love the fact that it makes me work really, really hard to make sure that it works. I did a project in Contra Costa County when it was 113. A client came in and said, Chuck, this better work. It was into my office by surprise one day. Anyway, I'm kind of trying to go through this fast, but I hope I can communicate this notion that when you're dealing with real people, I find, real residents, I find that it really makes you think about things in a lot more in depth than you might otherwise think about things. I didn't think about them this in depth because I never worked for a regular developer who would let me not have an AC in that setting. But these co-housers, they didn't want an AC. One woman told me once, she says, Chuck, I've never read any paper or anything that said that it was okay to heat the planet to cool your house. I've never seen that. And boy, all of a sudden, you've really got to get serious about it, right? My favorite slide. My highest heating bill in Nevada County, which is, we get a fair amount of snow too, it's cold these days, has been $20. Be $20 a month. So, and because I care about these folks. What do you guys want me to do? To say, should I go next? Next, okay, thank you. I only use granulated blown-in Amazon.com boxes. Because that is we generate a lot of those in this culture, and I find that they make the best insulation. They really do. They have a lot of what do you call that stuff in wood that makes it stick to other wood? What's it called? Anybody remember? It starts with a T. Anyway, it's the best insulation, and the way I feel about it, I'm really big into carbon sequestering, and this is an easy way to do a lot of carbon sequestering. Of course, put a little borate in it so it doesn't fire, etc. There's lots of technical issues when you're doing new things that you have to get hip to, of course. But and these studs are at 24 inches on center. It's fine. Even when I use 2x4s, I put them at 24 inches on center because it's fine. And I don't know how we ever got into the 16-inch on center MO. And I kind of feel like the best we can do as architects these days is serious carbon sequestering until the serious technocrats get really good at figuring out what we're going to do next. We have to do something in the near future. So what can we do in the meantime? And besides use no energy, no AC, no electricity, and no natural gas, and sequester some carbon. Next. Oh, I like this better, thank you. Our common house, 4,000 square feet. And we have 34 houses that are smaller, half the size of what people used to have. And I argue, and they argue, I don't want to make it sound like I argue a lot, because what I do is I set them up with a platform, and I really just want to do what they want to do, except if they don't think of something, I'll bring it up, basically, and they usually feel like that's positive. Anyway, folks feel like they have a 1,000 square foot house, but they have a 4,000 square foot common house, so they really have a 5,000 square foot house. And that's really true. I mean, it's really true that, we have dinner in the common house available 6 nights a week. It happens, I go once or twice a night. I'm missing it tonight, of course. And that's not my project. That's another project, whatever. And that's how you do affordable housing, frankly. I've been doing a lot of homeless projects lately, do these little tiny houses, even for a family. And when I make a serious common building with showers and laundry and computers and bathrooms, frankly, then we can actually scale down on, just getting people the basics. We have too many people dying. I've got 3 new homeless projects now in Spokane, Washington, because they were having 4 or 5 people die every single night. More deaths per capita than any other town in the US, because they have a very special climate. I just finished a large co-housing there, and I got hip to the climate, which is 4 to 5 freeze thaws a day, for like 3 months, 4 months. 4 to 5 freeze thaws a day. So if you can imagine what that does when your condensation happens inside your t-shirt and then it freezes. Hypothermia is really right there. So anyway, I don't know why I brought that up here. The money we save living in co-housing, a neighbor of mine just did an analysis of her bills for her 1,400 square foot house, not here in the co-housing, but a single family house in Nevada City, and it's about $2,600 a month. And mine is about $900 a month, because we buy all of our internet together at about $20 a person instead of $95 a person. So many things you can do by sharing, it's amazing, including shared cars. And the Tesla has been a game changer. As soon as people are sharing a Tesla, it's all of a sudden, they're on board. Yeah, sign me up. And we have 1 lawnmower for 34 houses, and everybody we have probably 100 things, including a pool and a hot tub. We have well over 100 things that we share and save a considerable amount of money. And like the lawnmower, you get, this culture comes to play where you're going, well, if somebody proposed a second lawnmower, everybody just go, what are you talking about? Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense, Anyway, it's kind of interesting how the culture shifts at that level when people get used to solving individual problems by cooperating. Things move. Oh, yes, next, please, thank you. Put that over there. Our common terrace is very popular, especially when the beer making club is opening up a new keg. Next. Common dinners, as I mentioned, 4 or 5 times a week is common. This is Cotati, California, a very successful co-housing community. Next. This is the one that won Neighborhood of the Year in 2004. I'm an architect. I really believe in design, light and form and color and all that stuff. I designed these chairs, in fact. Worst contract I ever designed. I designed those chairs for $4,500. And they sell over 100,000 copies a year. So dumb. So dumb. Anyway, but next, this is the real point for me, do people get to know each other, etc. And dinner is so much more than sustenance. It's, what are you doing this weekend? I'm thinking about going for a hike. I'm going to take my kids to the zoo. Do you want me to take your kids too? It just goes on and on and on. All of the activities that people start to believe and feel that they can have more fun by doing with other people. Next. Common dinner in our co-housing. Next. Our common kitchen. which is not commercial grade, and that's always a workout every time, you know, with the fire department, the local fire department. No Ansel hood, which means I have to argue that we're not going to make bacon, and we're not going to do deep fat French fries or anything like that, and we don't have any food for sale. There's always the co-housing argument. Unfortunately or unfortunately, I think it's very fortunate, frankly. In fact, I had a project in Eugene, Oregon that I just finished, and the city wanted us to spend $485,000 to put in a water line because they wanted us to do a loop all around the block, and it was going to cost $485,000. And I just said, nope, we can't do it. We're not doing it. We can't afford it. We'll have too many people have to drop out of this project if we did it. We came back to the city and said, why? And we got a new engineer. But the reason was they didn't want the project, they didn't want the water line dead ending in our co-housing. So, and their argument was somebody goes on vacation for a month and they come back and they're getting all this water full of bacteria, right? So we made an argument that somebody leaves for a month, a couple of co-housers will go into their house 2 or 3 times during the month and open the taps on their water. It's very simple. It's amazing how often the social solution is the easiest and the most overlooked. But anyway, that water line ended up costing us $45,000 instead of $485,000. So when you wonder about why housing is so expensive, the cooperation is the watershed, frankly, to not having to put a washer and dryer in every house and not having to do this and not having to do that by virtue of cooperation. Next. The kids' room, very, very popular, so popular. Next. You know, people always say, you know, that, only the young people are going to do landscaping. Not. Next. The seniors do a lot more. This is a project that in Vancouver, when the average house was $778,000 in Vancouver, and we had to do them for a lot cheaper. A 29-year-old woman started this project. She's a physical therapist, and 100% of her patients are brain damaged infants and toddlers. Brain damaged by their own parents, shaker babies. So it was a traumatic start, and she said from the beginning that I need support when I come home. I need something more than just my empty apartment when I come home. I need a community. And she didn't have anywhere near enough money, but she managed to get her house built. She managed to get her house financed for a 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom house. She rented out 3 bathrooms that covered her, 3 bedrooms that covered her mortgage, and she had her room, her room too. We ended up doing 2 like that. So what happens in the context of co-housing is a lot of innovation happens at a lot more than the real estate side of the equation, or I should say the real estate in combination with the social side. So we had 2 houses like that that accommodated 8 people, 6 renters altogether. And that also worked because we had a 6,100 square foot common house. You know, one of the things that makes shared houses hard is when you walk out of your bedroom and then there's like 3 or 4 other people there, right? It feels kind of claustrophobic. But when they're having dinner at the common house, when they've got their kids up at the common house, it's a whole nother dynamic, basically. When they're out here in the courtyard, it's a whole nother dynamic. You feel like you have a lot more real estate and you don't feel like you live necessarily in a shared house. Next. That's her right there. It was this group, talk about guts, they bought 3 single-family houses and went to city council and said, we want to put 31 houses on it. That was a major rezone, as you can imagine. And it took, the city council to approve it. But we had a Philippine woman, she's not in this photo, with a 7-year-old child that made the compelling case at City Hall. Vancouver City Council had not done that since the Vancouver Olympics, which was like 15, 20 years ago, had not overruled the Planning Commission. In this case, the Planning Commission said no, and the City Council said yes. And because they're, politicians, and they had to listen a little bit more. Anyway, next. This is that project. They bought 3 lots, put on 31 houses, and made it extremely affordable. This has got to be the future, and this is before we started to loosen up the zoning in the lower 48. Now Minneapolis was the first town to, unzone all single-family house zoning. I think that's the future, basically. I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. We're doing a lot of projects these days, including that project in Oklahoma, where that group bought a single-family house. Talk about heavy lifting. They bought a single-family house in the nicest neighborhood in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and had it rezoned to 24 houses in the nicest neighborhood, where all these mansions were around. And they had some serious flack, but they had wonderful diplomats. Next. That's the 4-bedroom house. 4-bedroom, 4-bath. Next. That's the project. Next. Early drawings. I still have to do those drawings and models and stuff because, first of all, I want the group to really know what's going on. And second of all, I want to smother the city with love, frankly. That's my whole approach. I do more than they ask for. And the group has a lot of pride in what's been created, so they get up there and make their case. The architecture is not cheaper, by the way. That's one place that they don't save money, because I want to smother everybody with love. But look at the single-family house neighborhood that we were putting this moon landing in. Next. And that's the project today built. Next. And that's the life there between the buildings, and that's what matters. Next. Emeryville Cohousing, we took an old factory, a 1-story factory, and turned it into a 2-story co-housing with 12 units on 0.29 acres. Again, no setback versus 15-foot setback over the height limit, half the parking. I would have never accomplished that without the future residents. None of that. None of that. Next. And this is a rehab of an old factory, as you can see here, which I kind of like doing, basically. I love going into these old factories and figuring out every single rivet, every little bolt, every little thing, because if I do that, if I understand the building, every little minute detail, then I can do it very economically. If I can't, from the beginning, the contractors, the builders, everybody was like, Chuck, it's going to be cheaper if you just tear this thing down and start over. Of course, that's the common refrain. The only way to get around that is to understand every bolt and figure out how it can contribute to your final solution. Next. That's that. And the group. Next. The group bought that factory for $5,000. This was $500,000. Went in and understood all that. I ended up having to not do any new footings, even though I added a second story on top. I ended up, the bottom structure was enough to hold the top. I had to, really go in there and understand it. Next. And that's the design of that. Next. That's the common house. Next. That's my house for 12 years there. Next. Berkeley, California, the group bought 7 houses, and we rehabbed those 7 houses and then built 7 new houses. Interesting thing about that project, so many things that project somebody could write a book about, because this is the first project in 30 years where they had taken property off the rental and made it ownership housing. That was the group. But the group made the case at the podium. I want to own my house, but I don't want to pay more than I pay in my rental house. I want my mortgage to be the same amount as my rent is, and they accomplished it. Started by 3 single moms and an older woman. And they pulled it off. Next. And so, over and over again, this is there. Interesting thing about this project, this is a rehabbed house, and this is a new house under that house, so we've jacked that up. This is a rehabbed house, and that's a new house under that house, so we've jacked that up. A lot of jacking up houses. And people often, I just hear this all the time. Today I was invited to come to a new housing symposium in San Francisco. And I don't get, frankly, maybe this is my limitation, but I don't get how to make affordable housing without the future residents involved. It's just been become part of my DNA, because they make it happen, frankly, over and over again. I don't want to go argue to the Berkeley City Council about why they need to take this rental housing to ownership housing, because hypothetically, people are going to be able to live here and pay what they paid previously for their rental. First of all, they won't believe you. They just won't. You're just trying to scam them. I mean, realtors and architects have been trying to, give them a rose-colored story for a long time. And, but they will believe them, especially because half the time they know them. They're citizens that they know. Next. One of the rehabbed houses there. Next. Santa Cruz, California. I was the architect here. This is 19 units on 0.24 acres, very dense. Of course, density is a big part of accomplishing affordability, but, and this is, Pacific Street's right here. So one of the things that made this project work was that they really saw that they lived Pacific Street too. Not just their house and not just their common house, but we also live in the bookstores and the cafes and the park that's right there around town. And they taught each other how they each individually have learned to live in the bigger town than just their property. Next. Common dinner there several times a week. I love staying there. Next. This is the project, the co-housing in Spokane, Washington. This is kind of our bread and butter, these kind of projects. Next. But I don't mind doing the dense ones either. This is life right after they moved in. Next. I've grown the whole, as the book says, high functioning anything, whether it's schools or hospitals. I've learned from the co-housers to expand, participatory design into those other elements. This happens to be a child care center that I designed at San Francisco State. I've designed about 50 child care centers now around the world. I really enjoy them. It's designed to be very much like a village. And of course, when I started working with the parents, they were very quick to say, Chuck, I need a place here on campus in this child care center where I can come and be and hang out with my kid for a few minutes, do some of my homework, commune with some of the other parents before I go home. So there's a serious social setting right there at the child care center. And what I love is how regular folks just expand the whole life deal to meet their real 21st century needs, not just rearview mirror stuff. That's what we did last time. That must be what we're going to do next time. There's very little rearview mirror stuff in making a new co-housing or a new school. And they were very clear from the beginning. We wanted to feel like a village. This is a brand new project. It's so funny because the head of facilities at San Francisco State says, Chuck, there's nothing like this on campus. It all looks like this. Why don't you make it look like that? What's so crazy about that? This project will have forever endurance because it's so loved. That was torn down a long time ago, basically. This project was built in 2000. Next. And, very cozy environments. Next. Then senior co-housing came along. It was started by 6 women in Denmark in 1985 who decided that seniors needed to start to wake up and get with the program around their own quality of life. Forget about, what's not working in life. Let's figure out how to make life work for us, too. So they started a program called Study Group 1, where they, for 10 weeks, an hour and a half each, they talk about aging successfully. And after a few months of doing that, the very last session, session 10, the 10th week, they visit a variety of housing projects. This is what a nursing care looks like. This is what assisted care looks like. This is what independent care looks like. This is what custodial care looks like. And then they visited this very youthful co-housing. It was so great for me because they were eldered by the 30-year-olds. These seniors were shown by the 30-year-olds, don't look in the rearview mirror. Look ahead. And imagine that you, in their case, they wanted to be all the parent that they could be. Imagine you want to be all the individual that you want to be later in life. So anyway, they started this great program called called Study Group 1 and then Senior Co-Housing. Next. And I got to say, you know, visiting, maybe 100 of these now in Europe, I've never seen anybody have as much fun as they do. I feel like I'm back in college, you know, at the fraternity or something. You know, and then I was showing this slide in Germany a couple of years ago, and somebody said, well, Chuck, sure, I mean, there's 9 people and 11 bottles of wine. So it's just math. It's not even high math. It's just, what's the confusion? And, you know, they don't have any jobs, they don't have responsibility, they don't have any kids, they're not courting that often much anymore. So they're in for the, they're into making their day-to-day life interesting, telling their stories, hearing other people's stories, and having a good time with the basics of life, like dinner. Next. And the interesting thing is that slide previously was taken 25 years ago. This slide was taken 5 years ago to Senior Co-Housing that we just finished in Grass Valley, California. It's timeless. You know, a few years ago, I was on a boat in the Mediterranean with a Danish architect, the Danish architect who started co-housing in Denmark, Jan Goodman Hoyer. And every time we landed in Greece or Turkey or Italy, this was the scene on the wharf every night, basically. So this has got to be about as timeless as it gets. People talking about the issues of the day. Sometimes there's an organ recital of one sort or another, but it's not as much as you think. And, you know, they get beyond that. Next. Usually they have some care that happens on site. Next. But this is typical care in a senior co-housing setting. Next. And dancing and carrying on. This is the Oklahoma project. Next. Like I said, I love working with senior co-housing because they're so impatient. She's the one who came up with green bananas. And look at her brother. He's like, are we done yet? But I love this. This is a husband and wife. He's 100% blind. She's a quadriplegic. And he pushes the wheelchair, and she tells him where to go. Seems about right. Next. You know, designing single-family houses with residents is a whole nother thing than designing the designing the common house and designing the site plan. Site plan and common house goes really quickly. The houses are a little bit more complicated. I got to tell you, I know this sounds totally chauvinistic from an architect's point of view, but I've never been in a house designed by the resident that I liked. I'm just going to say that. I mean, and next. But I will say, when I design houses with future residents, like this is 100% of the 2-bedroom, 2-bath house group. Usually there's 3 or 4 house groups per project, and I'm sitting down with 8 or 9 families at the same time and spend an hour and a half with a piece of flimsy, come up with a house plan based on their discussion. They've had real values, real lives, real experiences, and when you really listen, you can really come up with some great stuff, frankly. 1 + 1 = 3 is basic co-housing math. You have an idea, I have an idea, together we come up with a third idea that's better, over and over and over again. And when you get the group process just right, like that thing I was mentioning with the Japanese, that you see, I just did this with another group in Newfoundland, and they said, Chuck, wait a minute, 1 + 1 = 5 tonight, because she felt like we really knocked it out of the park. I gotta say, these houses can be quite nice, especially for multifamily housing, when you do them with residents sitting at the table. Next. This is a project I did in Boulder, Colorado. Interesting thing about this project, Boulder has such a bad reputation from an entitlements point of view, and it is normally bad. We had one hearing at Planning Commission, and they approved this project, and everybody said that's never happened before. We had 2 nuns in this group that were just something else. They were something else. And we would go meet with the fire department or the planning department, and I would say, okay, if I make a little sign one way or the other, just look really pissed. And it worked. It was great. Next. This is their project, and this is quintessential co-housing. Instead of a street going down here, they landscape this. They use the alley for parking, and they have outdoor dining, outdoor cooking, a water reservoir for water management. What we turned it into an amphitheater with a stage, garden, front porches, a life there that gets very well articulated. And everybody from the beginning was very clear. Chuck, make sure as many houses as possible can see the bicycle shed. And go ahead and go to the next. I hope I have that slide in there. That's the same project. Next. Models I have to make all the time. Next. Life there. Next. I hope I don't. If I don't have that one, I'm going to die. Yeah, here it is. Every time I'm there, it's like 3 to 7 people that go bicycling at 10 o'clock almost every morning. And because they all see the bicycle shed, per their insistence. Margaret's going biking. I haven't talked to her for months. And I know they stop for coffee afterwards, so I'm gonna go bicycling. There's an immense amount of, and I hear this all the time, an immense amount of spontaneous bicycling because they can all see not only the bicycle shed, but who's going bicycling today. And I can't make it today, but maybe I can make it tomorrow. That's a whole other social formula. Next. Common dinner there, or when it's outside. Next. It's part of a big new urbanistic project. Where is it here? Oh, it's right there. Next. Mountain View Co-Housing, not too far from here. They bought a single-family house that was right in the middle of the site, moved it to the front of the site, and put 19 units on it. Serious garden there too. Next. Again, I hate to have done this project in Mountain View without these future residents. I mean, it was amazing. What they needed, the trash inclusion, we call it the temple to recycling, right on the street. They were able to bring Oscar Newman for all of you guys. Does everybody remember Oscar Newman, the author about defensible space? Yeah. They made an argument that if we put the recycling right on the street, then everybody will go to the street and see what's happening on the street when they take their garbage out. And they got it on. I mean, 0 setback right on the street. Did you want to tell me my time is up? You do.
Could you talk into the mic?
Oh, into the mic. Okay, sorry. All right. Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. Next. It's a lovely spot. Next. 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 Grass Valley Co-Housing. I have this serious Scandinavian bent as an architect, so most of my houses look like this. But it turns out to work really well for co-housing because the last thing you want to do is argue over decoration. So it's very shaker-like. The look is very shaker-like. And I do mention to the group, if we do it shaker-like, then you won't have anything to argue about. And if you want to put a bunch of Victorian stuff on it later, just go to town with it. But and they go for it. Next. We always do all these exercises with senior co-housing where this is what the bathroom is going to be like. Next. Even if they're not in a wheelchair. This is the first LGBT co-housing community in the U.S., 28 houses in Durham, North Carolina. It was so critical to do there because as they started off that project describing what it's like to be LGBTQ in North Carolina, especially when you need assisted care, especially when you need nursing care, you can expect a considerable amount of abuse. You probably have to go back into the closet. Your life shifts back to being a child, whether you like it or not. And so they said, the only safe thing we can do is get in the same place where we all have some sympathy for each other's story. We have some empathy, we have some understanding of what we've been through. And that was very powerful. It's also the first co-housing community I've ever designed where there's a graveyard on site, basically. Well, there is a graveyard on site. And they were very clear about the fact that, we want to be able to visit our elders and our mentors when they're gone. We want to have a place on site that we can visit their ashes and such. One of the many things I love about that is that, the more I design co-housing, it seems like the closer I'm getting back to more like indigenous villages, where honoring people that have gone is also an important part of life. Next. This is planning that site plan, and after we have done 2 days of this is just one part of the group, and the other group's in another room. Next. And here it is today. Super great place. Next. I got to tell you, it was one of the funnest groups I've ever worked with, but it took me some getting used to. Very emotional group. I think there was never a full 2-day-week workshop where somebody didn't break down crying. And you could argue that that's serious communication right there. Maybe other people felt like it, but they did it. Next. Port Townsend co-housing, senior co-housing, fantastic project, fantastic group. Next. And it's a real village. Next. They really have a life together. Next. And these were people who all lived in a single-family house. Too bad I didn't have in that slide, right next door to them was built a monolith for seniors, and it was the epitome of where I could never imagine being in. And go back one slide if you can. And this is what they wanted instead of a monolith, which I never saw anybody in the monolith outside. But I see these guys outside. I'm starting a new project there in April, and I spend a lot of time there now, just because of various different projects that I'm working on up in Port Townsend. And this is not staged at any level. This is people being people. Next. And if you want to know more, I brought lots of books, which I had to crawl in the back of my car to get through the trunk into the back seat because my car wouldn't open up, blah, blah. It's another story. But anyway, I hope you buy one or two, because these books have made all the difference in terms of getting co-housing built in the U.S. Basically, from every level, including, mom's into it, but dad's not into it, so mom buys a copy of the book, it sits out on the countertop, and the whole dynamic is kind of weird. It sits on the coffee table, and then dad has a friend come over, and he looks through it, and he goes, why wouldn't you do this? And all of a sudden, dad is giving it consideration that he wouldn't give it before. I hate to say it, but it seems like it takes us a lot to not imagine the rearview mirror as the way to go. And I think that's the last slide. So I'm ready for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Chuck. That's just an inspirational talk. I'm sure there probably is some questions. Who's first? And please speak into the microphone.
Well, I'm sure you don't remember me, but I spent the night in your co-housing about 20 years ago. Well, it's more like 17, something like that. But yeah, and I was going to be a part of the what do you call it, Grass Valley, the senior one, but that was like 2007, 8, and then everything stopped, and I guess the bank wouldn't loan the money, and it was put on hold, so I kind of forgot about it. But I've always, I've been to so many co-housings over like the past 15, 20 years, and I went on the bus tour, the ones up in San Francisco and Northern California. And I don't know if they're still doing that bus tour, but I'm so addicted to this area here, the environment and everything. I just couldn't pull myself away from here. But are there any beginnings of co-housing around here, or
every co-housing community starts with one motivated person. So it could be you. It could be anybody. And then they just start getting the word out and start talking about it, getting the book in the local library and letting people know about it. And actually, I'm pretty motivated these days. Some guy was telling me today at length how the architects in San Francisco are getting very activist-oriented. So I'm actually not doing any more construction drawings these days. So I'm looking for architects who want to do the construction drawings on the first project, and then pursue doing other co-housing projects. So really, a local architect could be one of those activists down here too. My wife and I were both activists and architects. We both went to school in Copenhagen, and every culture seems to have a profession that plays a serious role as activists, like the Doctors Without Borders in France and the ACLU in the US. The lawyers play a big activist role. And in Denmark, it's the architects who play a big activist role. And they shape that environment as a result in consequential ways. They're very, very involved. I got to think that's the future. I was very impressed by this guy in San Francisco today saying they're really mobilizing the architects to say, let's be part of the solution. Let's go out there and be part of the solution. Why not? And that means not just waiting for somebody to walk in the door saying, because basically, those projects that walk in the door, you get to trim the edges a little bit, but you don't get to be the major form makers. And the activists can manage to do that, especially when you get a constituency behind you. Yeah. So go ahead and get started. I invite you to start.
My name is Gabe Sanders. Thank you for doing this. This has been eye-opening. I'm on the board for Habitat for Humanity Monterey Bay, and I'm going to start a community land trust here on the Monterey Peninsula. And I'm really wondering what the family selection or individual homeowner selection looks like for this. How do you get folks to show up to these meetings well ahead of the actual, even ahead of the architectural drawings? How do you organize folks that way and make sure that they are ready to own a home or be a renter in a community like this?
Yeah, it's a lot different than Habitat, who has a formula, et cetera. In fact, I was going to do a project with Habitat in Port Townsend, and they wouldn't let me have future residents participate. So I said, no thanks, I'm not interested. Because it's not, co-housing doesn't have that kind of a formula. Co-housing's formula is whoever comes to the table, let's try to make some housing for them. That's why I argue for people who want housing for themselves or others, it really matters. It's really about being an activist, really. And especially if it's for themselves. Like for Santa Cruz, that group came to me and said, hey, and they lived on acreage too. Just because that was where the affordable housing was, way out of Santa Cruz, basically. And they wanted to live in affordable housing that was downtown Santa Cruz because they saw that would be their quality of life. That's where their quality of life would be, by not having to own an automobile and so many other things, not having to own a laundry and such. So, our whole practice, 35 years now, has been people coming to us saying, Chuck, we want to make one in Mountain View, we want to make one in Emeryville, et cetera, and then we just become the facilitators of that project. It's very self-selecting. I always expect somebody in the audience to say, Chuck, what if you get a real jerk involved? Because this is all done by consensus. That's a deal right there. And what if you get a jerk? And I said, I always say, it gets worse than that. What if it turns out you're the jerk? And basically people figure out very early on whether they can listen to other people and work with other people, or if they're willing to learn how to listen and work with other people. And there was a few slides in there where I could have pointed out that person was in that group for the first few days and found out that they couldn't really listen to other people. They were a high-paid lawyer or something, and they're just not used to listening to other people. And it doesn't take long to figure out that if I'm grading on 20 people are grading on me. So it's not sustainable, basically. So people self-select very much, based on their proclivities and capacity to learn how to work with other people. And most of us don't know how to do that, but we all have the capacity to learn it.
And are you brought in when most of the owners are actually on board, or
No,
you're in
actually.
the very beginning, like when one person has an inspiration that they want to do this, and they
Well, like
call you?
Mountain View was a couple, and they paid me to come to Mountain View and do a public presentation. And usually I do a presentation on a Thursday night, and then like not that different than this. And then on the last slide, I invite them to come to the local library on Saturday morning. For those who are interested in making a co-housing in your neighborhood, in your town, and usually there's 100 and, it's amazing. There's been hundreds of people coming to these presentations recently, and usually there's 30 to 50 that show up on Saturday morning who are motivated to move to the next level. And so basically on that Saturday morning, I talk a lot about the next step is really what we call a Getting It Built workshop, which is 2 full days, a whole Saturday and Sunday, where we come to the town and we talk about what the finances will probably look like, what smart group process looks like. I don't care how much land a group has or how much money they have. If they don't know how to work together, they're not going to make a co-housing community. So that's paramount, learning how to work with other people. And frankly, that's the best part of my job, is how many people tell me that now I've got all these skills. I take them to my workplace, I take them to my church, my school, etc. So what the design process is going to look like, and what the entitlement process is going to look like. How do you get your money in? How do you get your money out? That's 2 full days. Usually about 2/3 of the group stick after that, and then they're off to the races. Yeah.
And then the number of those determine how many units you are proposing.
That and some serious pro forma issues. Like, for example, with Santa Cruz, we tried to get close to 20 for the pro forma. Given the envelope constrictions, we only got to 19. That was fine. It worked out fine. And so there's a couple of major issues, like given the cost of the land and what have you, what the envelope is going to look like. But plus, even more importantly, real social math. That's another thing that I find is pretty challenged in the U.S., and they're very capable in Denmark. They figured out very early on that never do a co-housing with more than 50 people, more than 50 adults, because of the whole consensus thing. Trying to get consensus with 50 adults can be challenging, but it's an arbitrary number, of course, but it paid to have an arbitrary number. And they did enough empirical data. They had enough empirical data to know let's not go over 50. But they also figured out that that's a good number, 50, close to 50, because that means that every individual there will have probably 5 or 6 best friends who live there. And when you get home from work on a Friday night and you want to cry in your beer about something, hopefully one of them will be around. And so that social dynamic is happening too. So it's a lot of social math.
This is one of the best presentations wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for this. I'm wondering which one of your books has the process in there, because that's such a critical part of what you're doing.
This one is the latest, and it has the most thorough process. I especially wrote it for architects because I've been to visit too many co-housing projects that I didn't design that I was disappointed in. So.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, we're just having consensus with 2 people is sometimes a challenge, but with 50, what's your definition of consensus? Because with clients, at least in my practice, I've said, if something doesn't feel right, we're going to keep working on this until it does, and I call it sort of a sense of yesness to it when you finally come up with something. Functional definition of consensus might be everyone is heard, their voice is heard, and then we have consensus is what the majority want to move forward with, and as long as everyone's been heard, that works.
Sorry,
how does yours work?
Doesn't work for us. Consent means that every individual in the room consents. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's how I would do it if I was king of the world. But I do consent. It looks like the best way for us to accomplish this project in some kind of a timely fashion and on budget. And it looks like the best for the group even though if I was the king of the world, it's not how I do it. There's a lot of advantages to consensus, in my view, and the number one the advantage is that everybody's not only heard, but if I'm invested in consenting, then I better make sure that I'm as accurate as I can be in my dialogue here. And I find consensus so critical because these people are all equal investors in the project. There's no hierarchy there. And it's the only way to absolutely protect the individuals of the minority is that, are you going to get a swimming pool? Well, I don't want to buy a swimming pool, but if everybody else wants a swimming pool, I guess I can consent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
After you live there, there is a backup process, usually. I mean, I've lived in 3 co-housing now, 1 in Europe, 2 in the US. And in other words, they'll vote something like 7/8 the second night or later the first night, and then if that doesn't work, 3/4, etc. So in Emeryville, we had one night where we couldn't agree to something, like getting a housekeeper for the common house. And we voted on it. And it was so interesting how that left such a bad taste in the group's mouth. They never did it again. Nevada City, we've come close to, we never voted on it, but we've come close to it. And that experience alone left a bad taste, mostly because they realized they had grown that skill. I never try to get consensus with 2 people. I don't like it, but people say, how many people do you start on the site design? I try never to start with less than 12 people because I've had too many people convince me that that's where you get a good bell curve of opinions and good data and a good standard deviation on both ends, and you can have well-rounded information. I have done a project with less than 12 once, and I had to start over because the bell curve was too skewed, basically, and too much minority opinion was being propagated, basically. So I'm a big believer because they make the best projects, basically, and I'm a big believer because there's so many ideas get put on the table. I've worked for regular developers where consensus is out the window, of course, but and there's so much changing your mind and adding, and I just thought of something, and I forgot party bathrooms. It's all about party bathrooms. Chuck, put 2 shower heads in every bathroom now. Just walk in the room at the 11th hour and do that kind of stuff. And that doesn't happen with co-housing. You make a decision and you move on, you make a decision, you move on. Because it's so well considered, you don't have to revisit it. It's very little revisiting. That's all in the white book. 408 pages and 900 photos. Tell me what I forgot. I can't think of anything.
Thanks, Chuck, for the presentation. Really, such a beautiful topic, and really hits the kind of double feature of providing an incubator for a community, but also affordability and access to equity and building wealth, and so for me, I'm coming down from Santa Cruz, and my community of people largely are renters and people really priced out of the down payment of a single family home. And so for me, it's like I'm coming here with the idea of hey, how can we crowdfund at least buying a single family home and creating a co-op with a shared equity structure. And this co-housing is the level up of that, and I think really the idealistic dream for coastal California, very expensive. And so really my knowledge gap here, and what I'd love to hear from you, or maybe point me to resources, is what is really the kind of minimum bar of entry, and really talking about the financing structure in order to develop one of these projects.
Well, I've worked with groups where there was at least a couple people who had no money. And it becomes another design problem, obviously. And the design problem really boils down to how much are we going to learn and how much are we going to teach ourselves. because there's so much delta between what people know and what people need, really. Everything from knowing anything about the political process. So one of the first things I do when I'm working on an affordable project is I say, okay, a group of people here have to choose to go to the planning commission meetings for 2 a month, and the city council meetings for 2 a month. It's so interesting. When I knew a guy from Santa Cruz, and after the earthquake, he ended up developing about half of the projects in Santa Cruz. So I asked him, Jim, how did you do that? He says, well, I went to every planning commission meeting for a year and every city council meeting. And so I knew exactly what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear this, they wanted to hear that. And I just gave it back to them. And that's a level of homework that people have to be willing to do. Now, I find in co-housing, unlike Jim and his very individual initiative at that level, I find in co-housing, when 3 or 4 people go and they have a beer afterwards and they talk about it, the challenge and the interest is always making it fun, basically. And you can do that in that context. And not only that, you meet all these developers that are coming and going, and you can tap into them. I mean, I'm always amazed. Developers, they'll do anything for a free lunch. And so I always tell the group, take them out to, ask them if you can buy them lunch. And say, hey, I'm looking for a half an acre or an acre, and do you know of anything? This in Durango, Colorado, this is what happened. And the developer said, take him to lunch. They took him to lunch. The developer said, well, I've got this acreage, and I don't need a couple of these acres. And I don't really need your money right away. That's a key thing for a lot of groups. This project that we just did in Port Townsend, they didn't buy their land until they bought their houses. It came out of the mortgages. That never happens. That happens in the context of relationships, basically. And somebody in a group like that has to be comfortable and willing to be thinking about relationships as a currency of consequence. Not just money, not just land, but really, seeing the possibilities that are really out there. I met this woman today who lives in a project where she rents for $500 a month. And this project was given to, I guess, the city. I don't know the name of it. I forget the name of it. What is it? Pacific. Yeah. And it was given to them because somebody had built a relationship with, in that case, Clint Eastwood and who was the other guy that, I forget. But anyway, relationships mean something, even if they're not people that you normally hang out with. Actually, that's the interesting thing, is that, there's a reach out there that's consequential. And so everything from that level, the political level, that's just one of many, many levels, to, talking to a mortgage broker and having, like with Davis, California, 23 out of 26 were first-time homebuyers. This woman came and did a presentation. Her name was Gail Work. It was a perfect name for her. She gave a presentation to the whole group. And she said, look, if you go to the movie twice a month now, you have to go every other month from now on. If you have a late model car, you have to sell that and buy an old car. And you will find in this context that one day you have enough money to start to imagine yourself having choices as opposed to not having choices. And that kind of counseling for groups of people is very invaluable because there's discipline involved, there's relationships involved at many, many levels. And it makes it possible for people to do things they didn't imagine before. Partially, they imagined it now because other people that didn't have a pot to piss in were imagining it. So they all get an immense amount of chutzpah from each other. And that's awesome. That's just awesome. Yeah, good luck with it.
Chuck, I want to tap your experience in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I have been invited to join a co-housing project in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of questions that have come up in terms of just, how, as Americans in a sense coming into that situation, one is that, for example, the land is donated by the government. I guess that's fairly common in Europe, right, for co-housing?
Not exactly. I mean, doesn't happen in Denmark, but it's a good idea because, if you look, people are just starting to look into this, how much co-housing saves the government. Our county, Nevada County, just Western Nevada County, we spend $1 million a year just on giving seniors rides around town. 1 million. And the county has never showed up at our co-housing to give one senior a ride because we give each other rides. I want to hang out with Meg. She's interesting. I'm gonna go to the store with her. We're gonna, you start to ennoble and embrace that whole interactive process to the point where you don't need the government to be involved. But anyway, Spain is interesting. I was there during a presentation. They just translated the senior co-housing into Spanish. So I went over there for a week or two, and it's different. You have to be ready and willing and able to embrace another culture. And their whole co-housing culture is a little different too. So you got to be ready to resonate with that.
Yeah, for example, one of the things that we're finding challenging is the whole issue of whether or not not your investment, but your participation in the project is something that your offspring can basically inherit. And there's a very different view of that. Is that something that also is a challenge here in terms of that?
It is a challenge here. One thing that bugs me about how co-housing is going now is, with Port Townsend, one of the first things I do when I start a new project is I ask everybody to get a letter from the bank to say how much you can afford. And then we design backwards from that. And so we had 5 people in Port Townsend who really couldn't afford anything. But we managed to get them into a house. They were $300,000, which is a rabbit out of a hat in Port Townsend. And we built 11 houses like that. And so their case mortgage was less than their rent previously too. And but now those $300,000 houses are all selling for over $600,000. When they're resale. Now there's been about 7 resold. So some co-housing groups like Berkeley, California, luckily, they put a 4% resale cap on their houses. Abingdon, Virginia, they have a 40% of the appreciation goes back to the community. It's all about the agreement you make earlier. I really hope we have more of that in the future because the appreciation is interesting, but it's actually kind of deleterious to co-housing. If people get motivated to sell their house so that they have this windfall, for example, it's deleterious to community. And the kids get involved, and they want top dollar, especially if there's like 4 or 5 kids. So those agreements have to be in place early on, dead on, early. Yeah.
Well,
with the whole group. Yeah.
okay, well, thank you, Charles. That's been a great talk, so much information. And
You're welcome.
Please, as he mentioned, his books will be just for sale. There's a few out there, so if you're interested, please do that. And hopefully we'll see everyone at the Kip Stewart Lecture on March 20th. Thank you so much again.
Thank you guys very much.
Thanks again.
Really appreciate it. Yeah.